Good evening, everyone. I'm Karen MacNeil, author of the Wine Bible and editor of the digital newsletter Winespeed. And this is Defining the Dust, the third in our four-part series on the great wines of Rutherford in the Napa Valley. Thank you for being here. If this is the first time you're joining us, welcome. And if you've been with us before, we're so glad you're back. Because tonight, we have a very special tasting. We call it Rutherford's Historic Roots. And I think you could safely say that among Napa Valley's main appellations, none is actually more historic than Rutherford. The first two great estates of the Napa Valley, Beaulieu Vineyard and Inglenook, are in this appellation. We've got a lot to talk about, so let me tell you who's here with us tonight. Trevor Durling is the chief winemaker and GM of Beaulieu Vineyard, BV. There you see him. Welcome, Trevor. Steve Tonella is the winemaker and vice president of SR Tonella. There is Steve. And Jeff Cole is the director of winemaking for Sullivan. Let's quickly, gentlemen, hold on for a second. I want to quickly throw up a map here so that we can just remember where Rutherford is relative to the other appellations within the Napa Valley. And there you see it right in the heart of Napa Valley, just north of Oakville, just south of St. Helena. Established in 1838, one of the oldest wine areas in the Napa Valley, part of an original 12,000 acre land grant that had been gifted to the famous homesteader, George Yount, who in a sense founded Napa Valley. And George Yount in return gave it as part of a wedding gift, if you can imagine, if you wanted to be his daughter, gave it to a part of his land to his daughter and her new husband, Thomas Rutherford, hence the name of the appellation. So let's begin. Trevor, I want to begin with you because Rutherford's early history is really also the history of BV, or as we call it, which stands for, of course, Beaulieu Vineyard, founded by the amazing Georges de Latour, who found and convinced the great winemaker André Tchelistcheff to come from Europe, from Paris, all the way to the Napa Valley. And in the course of that, I think changed the trajectory, the history of Napa Valley forever. Tell us a little bit about BV.
So we are one of the oldest, continuously operated wineries in the Napa Valley, founded in 1900 by Georges de Latour, as you mentioned. And, he was really, he grew up in a tiny village in southwestern France, just outside of the Bordeaux district. And so he had some experience in viticulture, winemaking, et cetera, but he was really an entrepreneur at heart. And I think what originally attracted him to the Western United States back in those days was that he wanted to be a part of, this was post-gold rush era. People were building these amazing businesses. And he wanted a piece of that action, and he had this dream of producing wines in the New World that would ultimately rival those of his native country. And so he first moved to California in the early 1880s, landing in San Francisco, and he founded a company called California Tartar Works. And what he would do then is he would actually travel up to the wine areas, so mainly Sonoma and of course Napa, where he would meet the producers at that time, and he would enter their fermentation vessels, scrape off the tartrate crystals from inside of those tanks. This is something that naturally forms during grape fermentation and is typically discarded. And so he saw an opportunity here. He bagged this up in 100-pound bags after purifying it and sold it, which is it's cream of tartar, heavily used in baking, of course. During this time, he really developed this affinity towards the Napa Valley specifically. I think for a number of reasons. He fell in love with the terroir, certainly of Rutherford, right in the middle of the Napa Valley where we are. But also from a logistical standpoint, the fact that the Napa Valley opens up to the south towards the San Francisco Bay would be very advantageous for him to move his wines around once he started producing. So in the year 1900, he sold his business of California Tartar Works, and he purchased 4 acres of property on the western Rutherford bench, still part of Beaulieu #1, our original estate vineyard today. And when his wife, Fernand, first saw this property, she said, Beaulieu, what a beautiful place. And ultimately, that is what they named the vineyard and the winery, of course. And so throughout the early 1900s, he actually went in, planted about 80 acres of Petite Syrah after purchasing the adjacent 125-acre property next to that original space that he bought. And he started growing grapes and selling them to neighboring vintners. The other thing that he started doing that was very, very, very pivotal in those days was to import grapevines from France that were grafted to phylloxera-resistant rootstock. So he had this unfortunate experience back home many years earlier where phylloxera greatly damaged his family's property. And so he used this to his advantage decades later when it became well documented that this also existed in California. So he saw this as an opportunity to help save many of the vineyards around the area. And so he did just that. And then the third and probably most important thing that he began doing during this time was to produce sacramental wine for the Catholic Church. And this, again, was through a connection that his wife had with the Catholic Church out of San Francisco. And by the time we got to the Prohibition era beginning in 1920, GDL was one of the very few producers to not only survive this era from 20 to 33 when it was illegal to produce and sell alcohol of any kind other than through sacramental or medicinal purposes, but he really thrived as well. So he actually quadrupled the size of Beaulieu and purchased more vineyard property during a time when, of course, most people were shutting down.
It was good to be a Catholic then. Yes.
Oh yeah. We always, jokingly say that it's kind of funny that people started attending church much more regularly during that time to enjoy their sacramental wines. And he, really did wonders during this period, purchased more land. And once Prohibition ended in 1933, I think that's when he really turned, his efforts very strongly towards equality of wines coming out of this beautiful region of Rutherford in particular. And so fast forward to the year 19, a man named André Telesjeff, and convinced him to come back to the Napa Valley and take over the reins at Beaulieu Vineyard in this relatively unknown growing region at the time. And Telesjeff, of course, we don't have time to go through all of his biography, but he was studying at the Pasteur Institute at the time. Right. He was a brilliant man and really revolutionized the landscape of winemaking throughout the area.
Yeah, if you can imagine the Napa Valley at this time, no roads, stagecoaches. I mean, it's astounding that someone like Georges de Latour was so prescient and that he was intent enough in his ambition to have roped in André Telesjeff from Paris, from the Pasteur Institute, to come to the Wild West. It must have just been amazing. And if you think you just heard the term cream of tartar, yes, he was in the business of cream of tartar, which every baker will know is instrumental in baking. Steve, I want to go to you because Tonella's story is interwoven here into BV's story, because your great uncle actually was winemaker at BV before André Telesjeff. And then your great uncle and grandfather worked for BV for many years while having a small piece of land of their own. So tell us the story of Tonella.
You're on mute, Steve.
Steve, I think you're still on mute.
You're on mute.
Wow. Can you hear me now?
We can.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so this story kind of predates Telesjeff, and basically my great uncle came over from northern Italy in 1906, and he came over because they were advertising to rebuild San Francisco, and he said,
after the earthquake,
pursue the American dream and start a new life. And he did that. He went to San Francisco, but he didn't really enjoy the city too much. And so he had a relative in Rutherford, and January of 1907, he was having lunch, and one of the foremans of Beaulieu came by and said, "Hey, we're looking for workers." And the next day he was on Beaulieu's property He actually met George Latour, and yeah, my great uncle spoke good French, so they initially spoke in French, and later on they argued in French, so they could argue pretty good together. But he was there from 1907 to 1950, and he did everything from the vineyards to bookkeeping to making the wine and everything in between. So that doesn't really occur too much anymore. And just for clarification, I do everything from the vineyards to present the wine and everything in between. I'm not the principal winemaker. I do have somebody I brought on named John Hoffliger, who is a Swiss national. And if any of you have seen him or met him, he's a big guy. So I say he's one of the best winemaker, pound for pound winemakers, but not overall weight, just pound for pound winemakers. And so it's a really good collaboration because he's worked in Bordeaux as well as Rutherford for quite a while. But that's really how it really started. And George Latour and my great uncle started buying some property, and initially they bought in eastern Rutherford and close to where George III vineyard is today. And he could have bought a lot more, but he was a little conservative, but he carved out a good career for himself, and was part of the original 1936 vintage, which started the private reserve program. And I think Andre had a hand in that in terms of blending. But that's quite a few years of history in a couple of minutes.
And again, it's just so astounding. Sometimes people don't realize that St. Helena only got a stoplight in 1974. So its first stoplight. So the extraordinary vision of these families that far back is just incredibly remarkable. Jeff, let's go to you, because Sullivan is another historic site right in the center of Rutherford, as is BB and Tonella. And Sullivan was founded by James O'Neill Sullivan, finally an Irish person in the Napa Valley wine business, and founded it in 1972. And that period, the early 1970s, was really the great second golden age of the Napa Valley. That's when so many of today's important vintners came, including the Sullivan family. So tell us.
Yeah, Karen, thanks. So maybe not quite the history that Steve and Trevor are representing today, but still a definite tie-in. And Karen, as you were saying, the Sullivans migrated up here in 1972. I kind of call it the kind of the original of the modern day winemaking families, and they were part of that, along with like the Davies families and some of the other early modern day pioneers. But just like those other families, they were from different parts of the country, they had different careers, but they just all had a passion for wine. And at that time, they were hearing about this place in Northern California where phenomenal wines were being produced, and so they wanted to get in on that action. So actually the Sullivans, or Jim Sullivan and his family, at the time were in LA. He was a graphic designer, and so in the 50s and 60s, that was his primary profession. But again, making wine in his basement, I mean, you hear those stories all the time. And just decided to uproot his family and come up to Rutherford. And actually he enlisted the help of Andre Telechev and asked him to really help define an area, a plot of land that will allow him to make world-renowned, at the time, red wines. And I say that at the time because really, I think really this notion of Cabernet Sauvignon in the Napa Valley is a relatively new one. And back in those early days, what grows best and where was still trying, people were still trying to figure that out. And so Andre actually helped Jim Sullivan locate the property that I'm currently at now. It's 26 acres. The northern part of Rutherford, sitting on what is the northwestern part of the Rutherford bench. And it was funny, I hear stories from some of Jim's kids that at the time, the farmers that were around the area were kind of confused as why you would buy this piece of land and plant a vineyard, because nothing grows there. but that's precisely what they were looking for. They wanted less fertile. They wanted more well-drained soils, because that in turn produces quality and structure. And really, Jim Sullivan was Merlot, and then eventually Cabernet, but he wanted to make wines that had depth, that had density, that had structure, that could be enjoyable, but really were meant to age and develop over time. And so again, 1972, 26 acres, kind of the northern part of Rutherford, really sitting on the edge of the Rutherford bench. So really a special piece of land, but kind of cool to hear Steve and Trevor talk about the early history and how it all just kind of ties in here in Rutherford.
You're right, though. I mean, in the early 70s, this is when so many also important names came, the Novaks of Spotswood, the Duckhorns of Duckhorn, the Cakebreads, the Barretts of Chateau Montelena, the Duncans of Silver Oak. It was really Joseph Phelps. I mean, just an amazing time that Jim Sullivan was part of. And cattle and eggs were the two leading crops in 1972. Grapes weren't even in the number one position. When we think about Napa Valley and specifically Rutherford, I mean, how far it's all come in such a quick period of time. So I want to ask a question to all three of you before we taste. We won't wait too much longer because as every viewer knows, I'm not one for too much delayed gratification here. Now, all these wines are right open beside me, but I was thinking about this earlier, that all three of you you've been around vineyards, you've worked in wine for decades, you're not new on the block. And I'm wondering if your experience what your experience has taught you, apart from going to school in enology, viticulture, science, just the being of a winemaker for a long time. What do you know now that you could not have known as a young winemaker? Not necessarily about Rutherford, but just in general. Guys, I've got all three of you, and I can't resist asking that question.
I can.
Who wants to jump in? Oh, Steve, go.
I'll kick it off. So, I mean, I was basically child labor. No, I mean, I was exposed to vineyards at a very young age. So, for me, it's always been about agriculture, Mother Nature, farming. So, most of my family, since my great uncle has had a growing heritage, and so, I think really, and I'm not the first one saying it, it won't be the last, that really wines, made in the vineyard. If you really take care of the vines, they're going to take care of you. So I think it's a really focus on, on the vineyards. And, I've just learned that I'm not really classically trained. As I say, I don't have an enology degree. I've learned from great mentors and, hundreds of passes of the vineyard per season. And I think you really learn to listen to the terroir, listen to the vines, understand the vigor and health of each vine individually and collectively. So I just put an emphasis always on Mother Nature, which we can't control. And that's what makes it kind of stressful, but also at the same time very fun, because no two vintages are the same. They're related, but they're not the same. So it's fantastic to be able to showcase and talk about different vintage and different characteristics. I would also say the second piece is it takes a village and it takes a team. There's no one thing that is more or less important than the other. And, everything from, getting the right cork supplier to the right glass, to the right labels, that all, the vineyards and of course the winemaking are principal. But I think just everything there, it has to connect and come together to tell the story of the wine. So I think those are kind of the two main pieces from my perspective.
Okay.
And I would agree actually with, so both of those points that Steve just made were things that actually popped in my mind, particularly the thing around the teamwork aspect. And I think that, we can admit as winemakers that we are only really as good as the team around us who are helping us to craft these amazing wines. And that's everybody from the person picking the grapes all the way through the entire cellar team based here at the winery. And something that I commonly discuss with my team, because there's a lot of passion here, as you can imagine. The fact that we're so fortunate to be making wine from such a historic estate, a place that has such heritage and legacy and all of those things. We consider ourselves to be stewards of one of the most important parts of American winemaking history, right? And we are a chapter in this very long book, and that comes with great responsibility. So I think, just to see the passion of my team, to talk about, just to inspire them with, how things are tasting out on the market and what the perception is of these wines and all those things. I think that's really, really important because, as Steve put it very accurately, it does take a village. There are a lot of really passionate people involved in this. And then, of course, I think the other thing that you can't really learn in school is how to truly trust your palate and use that for, every decision that you make. I mean, sure, we have the benefit of having some amazing winemaking technology, and we know what to look for in terms of chemical analysis and that kind of thing. But at the end of the day, we need to embrace that vintage differentiation. That's one of the things that makes wine so beautiful, is the fact that each vintage is different. And the wines that we craft from that year should be a story of what Mother Nature gave us that year. And so you're going to have vintages where, the chemistry in the wine, for example, is quite different. And you can't go by that. You need to go by flavor, gut feel, and you need to trust your judgment that way. And so, I look at it as using that analysis to really, give us some of the, the information needed to make certain decisions. But at the end of the day, it's palate, and it's an art.
Yeah, it is an art. Jeff, jump in here.
Trevor, I think, was in my mind or doing something, swirling around, because my whole thing is instinct, right? You got to trust your gut, you got to trust your instinct, and that comes from experience. That's the learn by doing process, right? You get the education, you do the chemistry and the science, and you understand vine physiology and what makes vines grow and how to produce great wine. That's great. But as Trevor was saying, every year is different. And if you go strictly by the numbers, you're going to be all over the map. And so really it is, it's at least from my evolution is starting and gaining that cellar experience and gaining some lab experience and being a part of tastings and tasting other wines and, locally and wines from around the world to truly understand what's going on. And then, you start building a library, you start having this bank of experiences and knowledge to draw from. And, right now, obviously harvest has ended for most of us and fermentations are finishing up. But, when we're in the midst of it, you have base numbers that you can make some immediate decisions on. But once the fermentations gets going, you're out there, you're tasting, you're analyzing, you're adjusting, you're tweaking. It all comes from however many years, came before you in terms of your experience. So really, for me, at this stage in my career, it's really, being able to be confident in how I'm perceiving the wines, how they're evolving, where is this blend going to be in the next 5 to 10 years, and really leaning heavily on that past experience and the instinct that I developed to really, push forward every year.
And if you think of yourselves as following in the line of winemakers of the past, for most of those 8,000 years, no one was ever trained, right? For most of those 8,000 years, people did learn by trial and error and did operate off instinct and gut feeling. So there are actually a lot more years of instinct and gut feeling operating than of science operating. In fact, you can argue that really science only begins to operate once Pasteur discovers the action of yeast in the consumption of sugar in the overall process of fermentation. But anyway, it's so interesting to hear you all say that or express your feelings about that. Thank you. Let's taste now. And we've got lots of chat people are jumping on. Eddie in particular is saying back in those days, winery, we were talking about the early 70s, and even before that, that wineries were more family owned. Actually, should say, not to get too far off on a political topic, but 95% of the Napa Valley is still family owned. Sometimes large families, sometimes small families, but it's still a family gestalt, I guess I'll say. And Eddie, we'll get to your further comment. I see you writing in about acres planted. We'll look at that in a moment, but I really want to get to this tasting. So Steve, we're going to start, or excuse me, we're going to start, Jeff, with the Sullivan. And let me just hold this up to the camera.
Nice label.
Yeah. So like I
nice
said,
label. Yeah. Sometimes labels don't always get to the camera very well, but I think the camera is focusing here. This is the Sullivan Merlot Founders Reserve, specifically Merlot. All three of the wines we're about to taste are the 2018 terrific vintage. Everybody's pretty happy about it. But tell us about this wine and why you think that this wine, if you just tasted it in a lineup, has to be from Rutherford. Like, what about it says Rutherford-ness?
I'll just smell it.
All right, what do we smell? I'm like, what?
No, for me, I mean, Rutherford, I mean, this, most of the wines we produce on the estate here, have that typical Rutherford, signature. And I tell everybody, if you have one of my wines and you open it and you're trying to describe Rutherford, literally, it's what you smell in the glass. And for me, it is just those dark, savory, black fruit, a little bit herbal, but not green herbals, kind of that kind of dried herb. It's just got this, this cocoa powder, black chocolate, bitter chocolate almost essence to the wine. And so I think, the 2018 James O'Neill Founders Reserve Merlot is kind of epitomizes that. And what I think is cool about this wine, and I'll kind of give a little kind of history in terms of what we're trying to do with this Merlot specifically, is when Jim Sullivan came in the early 70s, most of the estate was planted to, I think, Chenin Blanc, Zinfandel, and Merlot. And as time went on, the Chenin Blanc and the Zinfandel went away, and he started planting more Merlot, and then eventually planted Cabernet Sauvignon. But really, Merlot is what he, was his foundation. It really put him, got the brand. I mean, that's what the brand early on was known for, was Merlot. And what I think, happened over time as Cabernet became more and more popular, that translated into, into the vineyard sites as well. And so, as I was talking about earlier, what winemakers typically look for, at least in the Napa Valley, is really well-drained soils. When you have well-drained soils, you reduce vigor, it reduces the crop size, you just have more concentration and more potential for extraction. And so really the last 20 years or so, Cabernet really gets the best soils, and everything else, the heavier clays, the wetter sites, really get everything else. And by default, you have inferior wines, or wines that aren't as structured and developed and dense as, a lot of the Cabernets here in the Valley. And so when Jim Sullivan found this property and planted Merlot on this really gravelly, sandy site, he just naturally had very intense, structured, layered wines. And again, as the Merlot craze, that used to be, Merlot, everybody loved Merlot. And in the last 25 years, Merlot has kind of gone to the wayside a little bit. And so for us, and this historical site and the great terroir that we have is we want to kind of pay homage to that. We want to bring it back, because Merlot, given the right conditions, grape growing, soil, the right handling in the winery through fermentation and the aging regimen, can make fantastic wines that I believe can rival, the best Cabernets, in the world. And some of the best wines are Merlot, but specifically here in the Napa Valley. And so I kind of take that approach with this wine. So, when I bring it in, I'm looking for lower yields. I push these wines in the fermenters because I know there is so much potential, and I'm trying to bring out structure. I don't want just some round, simple, lush wine that I use to tone down some of these bigger Cabernet lots. Like, I want a serious Merlot, a Merlot that will age, that has these layers, that represents Rutherford. And so stylistically, that was my approach with this. Really, that's my approach with most of my wines, because again, I'm very fortunate to have pretty good soil, pretty good terroir that allows me to do that. And so
if you thought about when the Sullivans first came in the 70s, and if they were looking at Bordeaux at all, Bordeaux is, in Bordeaux, the leading grape is Merlot. Those really beautiful, age-worthy, very layered, as you say, wines, most of Bordeaux is planted with Merlot, not with Cabernet. And so it was a logical thing to believe that if you had a great piece of ground, and if you saw Bordeaux at all as your model, that would be the grape that you would gravitate to, for the same reason Dan Duckhorn did at the same period of time, right? That you could make a really substantial and yet delicious, substantial and delicious wine at the same time.
Well, and what's cool about Rutherford and California in general is we're Bordeaux, it's cooler, and so the tannins tend to be a little bit more out front. You need time to age and let things mellow out and really resolve. Is being in California where things get ripe, we can make bigger styles, but we also get that lusciousness and that richness to kind of balance it out. And so you can truly make ageable wines that are a little bit more approachable early. And so, I mean, that's the beauty of living in California, specifically in Napa. And so anyway, we try to get that into the glass. And again, this 18 Merlot, I'm sorry, but it's tasting phenomenal right now.
No, it's tasting, not only is it tasting phenomenal, but I would argue that in a blind tasting, if you had 10 red Napa Valley wines, it would be hard to pick this out as anything separate from Cabernet. I mean, the two, they're very genetically close, right? They're closer than any other two varieties are, which is one of the reasons they work so well together. So we've got to keep going though.
Yep.
Let's taste, and I'm going to come back and ask each of you to talk about each other's wines. That Sullivan is just knocking it out of the park though. Thank you. Let's taste the BV Rutherford. And this is let's see, it's not a paper label. So let me see.
No, it's silk screened, and then there's a paper label on the bottom. So this is a wine that I'm very excited to discuss, because this is actually the inaugural vintage of what we're calling our Rutherford Reserve Cabernet Sauvignon, that comes primarily from our estate vineyard blocks right here on the western Rutherford bench, mainly. And I can't really talk about this wine without mentioning the great Andre Telescheff, who we touched on, of course, a little bit before when we were talking about some of the back history. But he was our winemaker from the year 1938 until 1973, when he left and he began consulting. Of course, as Jeff had mentioned, he was working with the Sullivan estate. He was working with a number of other producers around the area, and somebody that was just beloved by many. So huge personality, very small man in stature, at about 4'11". And I, pinch myself every day that I get to follow in the footsteps.
If you're not 4'11", okay.
I'm a little taller than that, but he has huge shoes to fill. And it's just it's a great delight to get to follow in his footsteps. But this is a man that truly revolutionized the landscape of winemaking in the Napa Valley, had a very scientific approach, all those things that we know, and many of the things that we take for granted today in the world of winemaking here locally were introduced to the area by this man. So anyway, sometime during the 1960s, he was famously quoted as saying, "It takes a lot of Rutherford dust to grow great Cabernet in the Napa Valley." And that's something, of course, he was referring to really the terroir, the microclimate that we have here, the sense of place, the very distinct characteristics that we see from the wines that are, from the grapes that are grown here in the Rutherford district in particular. And very shortly after he said this, of course, this term began being commonly used as a sensory characteristic, right? And so it is a subjective thing, but it's something that I think really resonates throughout all three of these wines. And the way that I like to think about it is, it's definitely that dark fruit, that kind of forest floor characteristic, a little bit of that dried herb that Jeff was mentioning that you get on the nose. And then to me, it's also a textural thing. So it's this cocoa powder texture and flavor profile that hits you on the mid palate, melts across the palate and into the finish. These are wines that have tremendous power in tannin, but they're very rounded at the same time. And
let me stop you there, Trevor, because I was reading something about your BV reserve, the new wine, and you had written that that Rutherford dust is characterized by tannins that the quote is grippy but plush. And I thought, how can something be grippy but plush? Explain that idea.
So to me, I think that it's a better way to put that is that there's a lot of power to these wines. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of saturation, intensity. They're beautiful wines, even 20, 30, 40 years down the road in many, many cases. But there's this roundness, this plushness to them. And typically they have, the mid-palate weight and volume to help support some of those bigger tannins. And that's something I think that is really special about this growing district that we're so fortunate to make wines from.
One of the things that I notice about the BV here, and actually about the Sullivan and the Tonella as well, and I promise, Steve, don't worry, we're coming up on your wine, but one of the things I notice is that the wines start out really very powdery dry, like cocoa powder. And then if you're, if you had to draw a picture of where the wine is going, then they hit the, as you say, the mid palate, midway through the sensory impact. They start to get really juicy, and they get really juicy and rich sort of toward the end. And most wine in the world does the opposite. Most wine is like fruity and juicy up front, and then it gets tannic on the end. It's as if someone turned the binoculars around. I've been tasting a lot of Rutherford wines recently, and I'm like, wow, there's a real, very clear way these wines present on the palate. At least, I mean, maybe you're all disagreeing, but I'm writing like lots of notes about this. Like, wow, I've never seen this before.
I agree wholeheartedly. I think that's very well put.
All right, well, then we're going to Steve's wine, and then we're going to backtrack. Steve, let's put the SR Tonella up. Let's see, let's get that to the camera just right. Okay, so that everyone can see. This is your 18 also Cabernet. You have to be a weightlifter to lift this bottle, Steve, but all right. Tell us about the wine.
Well, it again comes from the Rutherford bench, and talk about well-drained soil. What does that mean? To put it in perspective, when we have heavy rains, I mean, the next day you go out there and it's virtually dry. So very poor soil, it filters through. The roots have to go really deep to get their nutrients. This particular vineyard is trained in a vertical cordon style, which is not as widely planted or trained these days. So it's basically the fruit zone is vertical. Depending on how tall you are, it's from your knee height to maybe chest height, and the spurs and shoots radiate. So therefore the bunches of fruit radiate. So I always say, if you're looking at a Christmas tree and you're putting ornaments on your Christmas tree, you want them to space them correctly so everything looks nice. And I would say that's kind of similar to the way I view the vertical cordon style. The bunches are hanging freely. They have good airflow. There's a weeping direction to the canes or the shoots, so they get natural canopy and natural sunflex. So what you're really experiencing in Rutherford, at least from my perspective, is a very good long growing season, very good hang time, warm days, cool evenings. We prune a little bit later, so our fruit matures a little bit later. So we take advantage of the more temperate months of October and even sometimes into November. This year was really early, but generally late October. And
so tell me how all these things translate into flavor. What is the flavor like in this wine?
I think you're really getting the development of the berries and the fruit at the right time to create that complexity, that density in the wine. We utilize deficit irrigation, so we like to stress the vines out at a certain level so that the fruit really concentrates, it really matures naturally. Obviously, if you get a heat spike, we need to put a little bit of water on it, but we really restrain the irrigation program so that we develop this complexity in this long growing season. And that also has to do with the canopy management. So our vineyard, we manage 100% by hand, no tractors or machinery, and you can't do that really with larger scale production, or it's a lot of hours. So we actually manage the canopies differently on the morning side and the afternoon side. And I think that in summary kind of helps the maturity and the maturation phase into developing that complexity, that duration on the vine, that terroir complexity over time. And also these are clones of our Bordeaux clones. There's 2 Bordeaux clones here, and they're known for their small berry size, phenolics, and extraction from the skins. So we get a lot of our tannins from the skins. Our French oak barrel program, we do a lighter toast, like a medium toast or less. So we think it balances the tannins from the barrels and the tannins from the skins to, achieve this type of single vineyard Rutherford bench Cabernet.
I guess in the end, part of what all 3 of you are saying is that you can taste care in a wine, right? You can taste how much someone agonizes over every little thing. For those of us who are not winemakers but just tasters, we don't know what does it mean for a cane to be this way or that way, or for the shoot positioning to be vertical or more horizontal. But I think we all can taste when a wine is made with intent and with care. Hard to describe in words, but easy to sense in the taste. So bravo to all 3 of you, because as I tasted these starting maybe, I don't know, a half an hour before we went live with everyone. And it seems to me that there's an enormous amount of concentration and beautiful integrity in these wines, but they're not over the top. Thank you for not doing that. They're not like slamming wines. They're not rap music. There's some beauty here in each one of these wines that is lovely. And they're changing by the second here now too, which is always a good sign, right? Watch that wine unfurl itself. Is like, okay, a whole night is ahead of greatness if you're tasting with us. So I want to quickly, because we are almost out of time, but all right, let's go. I want to go back because I think it's always a mistake to just taste in one direction and not go back in the other way, right? We all know that. It's much better to kind of mix up your mind a little bit and go back to a wine with fresh eyes. So let's taste Jeff's wine. Let's taste the Sullivan. And Steve and Trevor, your thoughts on this wine. We're not going to let Jeff talk.
So I'll happily jump in here. I love this wine, and I love a good Merlot, particularly from Rutherford. We also grow quite a bit of it, and I do use it even on occasion as a blender in our flagship, Beaulieu Private Reserve. And that main block that we would use there does come from the original property at Beaulieu Vineyard number 1. And before I dive into this wine specifically, I just wanted to make a quick comment, kind of adding to what you were talking about, Karen, with this lineup here. And I think that one of the beautiful things that all of these have in common with each other is that they really express a sense of place. And to me, that is one of the things that really makes a great wine is you have these wines that really, they come from somewhere, and what the growing season was like, where they're from, and they have that common Rutherford dust character. And I think they're expressing this beautiful growing region, wonderful
All right, now,
in their own way.
Trevor, back to, I'm going to be the teacher about this. Back to the Sullivan wine.
So I think this wine is incredibly intense. There's many layers to it, aromatically exploding out of the glass. I'm getting a lot of dark fruit, that forest floor. And what I'm really intrigued by is the weight and the texture here. So there's this silkiness to it, but there's also a lot of power. I think it'll lay down for a long time.
All right, nicely said. Steve, you go.
Yeah, I mean, I like how all these wines evolve in the glass. I'm not a big decanter. I like to open it up and see how it evolves in the glass. And I think that goes back to when we ferment until we release. We're always tasting it. So it's like a child growing up. But I like the tannin structure here. It is a really nice, fine tannin structure, has a nice frame. This is a great wine on its own or with food for sure. But I do get a lot of fine tannin structure here. And, you know, I think the fine tannins are a product of age. As it ages, they kind of round out, they become less angular and they become really round. And this wine just has kind of what Trevor said in terms of, you know, the structure, but also the forest floor and all the other characters. But I would just emphasize the tannin structure and how it's framing the wine nicely with all those other profiles.
Yeah, I love this idea of frame and picture, right? What's the frame and what's the picture? I'm going to say, I don't know, Jeff, this might have to be my Thanksgiving wine because that little bit of sage is like Thanksgiving stuffing. I can see it already. It's so delicious. Lots of savoriness and umami, you know, they have umami kind of character. I also really appreciate the precision of this wine. It is not only a wine of place, but it's not muddled. It's not like, I don't know, dissonant music. It's a very precise wine. And I always feel like no matter what the flavor is, if it's precise, if it's like a musical note, right? That is categorically a good thing. Super delicious. All right, now we're going to put Trevor on the spot. And Steve, I'm going to ask you to go first and then Jeff to go.
Yeah,
Trevor, you cannot say anything. Okay.
Deal.
I'm on mute. No. I do get forest floor, but I do get a lot of, I get a bit more cassis on this wine. I did open it. Honestly, I corvined it because I'm going to save it for later as well. But I do get a lot of forest floor.
Plug for Corvan here.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So some nice earthiness, nice cassis. I really love the cassis and violet. You know, it's candied in a way that's not sweet, but it kind of represents those fruit profiles in it. You know, kind of threading Sullivan back. I do get some red fruit, which I think is nice. So it has that type of complexity to go from red to black fruit with those hints of herbal notes. So I really love this wine. Again, the tannin structure is fantastic. Trevor, great salute. You know, great first vintage of the Rutherford Reserve.
All right, Jeff, your thought.
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, definitely the Rutherford savory, but yeah, as Steve was saying, there's kind of this lift aromatically and this kind of fresher, fruitful, more identifiable fruit, which is very inviting. And then again, on the palate, you know, there's obvious weight, there's juiciness, there is, you know, structure, but it's not overly structured. And what I appreciate about this is you can feel the acidity. And to me, I mean, before I was at Sullivan, I spent 7 years up at Schramsberg Vineyard. So I have an affinity for acid. And then in my winemaking, I'm very cognizant of balance and not having overly ripe, high pH, low acid wines. And so for me, I quickly, you know, honed in on this. And even though there is a plushness to us, there's a freshness, there is that backbone that drives and just gives this wine phenomenal length. So yeah, no, fantastic, delicious wine.
Such an important comment, right? I'm right there with you, Jeff. I think there's a lot of lift and freshness to this wine. And sometimes we don't talk about that enough when we talk about Cabernet and Merlot. But those wines, in order to age well and in order to drink well right now, freshness is it's the hum in a wine, right? It's the little electrical current of energy that makes you want to go back to another sip. Nicely said. All right. Let's taste the Tonella. And I will say that Ashburn Rawls has just written in to say, how long should these wines be cellared? One thing, we'll get to that in a minute, but one thing is that the freshness of them as well as the tannin of them is going to stand them in good stead for a long time. Both of those things are preservatives in wine, acid and tannin. So you've got like a good double dyad of great ageability potential here. So the Tonella wine, Trevor?
Well, first of all, Steve, I just got my workout pouring this.
I know.
Love the packaging and everything. I mean, this is an amazing wine. The first thing that comes to mind when I taste this is saturation and density. So I think there's a lot going on here. It's very, very complex. It's evolving in the glass every 10 seconds or so. It's really opening up and changing. I love the integration of oak here too. I think you've done it in a really beautiful way to where it's there to support the fruit. It doesn't overpower it. It doesn't cover it up. It adds structure and quite a bit of complexity to the wine. So I think this is deeply dense. I think that it is showing beautifully right out of the gate. It's round, it's open, it's inviting, but it also has that core that's going to allow it to age very gracefully over a very long time. So very well done. Lots of Rutherford dust in this glass.
Beautifully said. Okay, Jeff.
All right. Yeah, Steve, great job. And we've kind of been harping on it. I mean, there is a sense of place to Rutherford. It's that dark, savory character, but with the BV, there's that red kind of uplift. With the Sullivan, it's kind of a little bit more of the herbal dark chocolate. And then Steve, with yours, I mean, you got this, the blueberry, the bluish black, kind of the blackberry. I mean, just very pronounced fruit, which I think is just phenomenal. And again, that carries over to the palate. I think your wine has just this juicy quality that just wants you to keep coming back, and it just lingers and it just saturates the mouth. But it's, again, like Trevor said, the oak is definitely second fiddle, and you're allowing the fruit profile to really show through and shine. And I think, which is great. And I, tend to have the same approach as, what little fruit I can get, I try to, let that shine, because too much oak will muddle it and tone it down. So you did a great job allowing this wine to kind of really showcase the site and really, have this nice, juicy, fruitful essence to it.
All right, last question. And we can all see that winemakers are so, they don't often talk about their own wines. It's so interesting to me. It's hard to come up with words, right? It can be hard to describe wine. So thank you, all three of you, for doing such a good job. Last question though, and I want to go back to something Ashton said. So he asked how long can these wines last? And I said, acid and tannin, stand them in good stead. So I'm going to take a little bit of license here and ask a slightly different question than Ashton's, which, because we all know that wine isn't a cake, right? It's not ready at 1 minute. There is no 1 minute when it's going to be perfect. There are many minutes when it's going to be absolutely fantastic. So I want to ask each of you, just give me a number for each of these wines. If you had right now, you could project into the future, you'd like to drink this, your own wine, in how many years? 6 years, 8 years, how many years? 30 years, how many years? Jeff, your number. 5? Okay, Trevor?
I'm going 10.
10? Okay, Steve?
I'll see your 10 and raise you to 18 years.
Of course you will, Steve.
All right, these guys know each other. You can just tell. I'm at 12, but all right. Yeah, we do know that all three of these wines will taste delicious from 5 to 18 years. It's clear now. All right, thank you, gentlemen. This has been really a great tasting. I'm so grateful that you would taste with us. Really quite beautiful wines. They are going to be wines that I'm going to watch all night long. So thank you. And I do want to say that for everyone who is watching, if you'd like to actually get the 2018 Rutherford collection, you can. You can go to www.rutherforddust.org/wine collection. And there you'll have an opportunity to buy 6, 12, or 18 wines that are part of the Rutherford Dust Society. Christmas is coming, holidays are coming, such a great gift, right? And maybe even a gift just for yourself. So again, Jeff, Steve, Trevor, thanks so much. And thank you all for joining us tonight on Taste with Karen Live. We'll see you next time.
Cheers. Thank you.
Cheers, guys. Thank you, Karen. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Pleasure.